The Kelver scrapyard station hung at the very edge of civilized space, a massive structure that looked more like a metal graveyard than anything else. Ships from hundreds of different worlds filled every corner of its docking bays. Some were missing entire sections. Others had burn marks across their hulls. All of them shared one thing in common: nobody wanted them anymore. They sat there in the cold darkness, waiting to be torn apart for scrap metal or just left to rot in the silence of space. Among all those broken vessels, one ship stood out. Not because it looked damaged, but because it looked perfect. The Void Whisper was a Zenthari exploration ship, and even after 300 years, its silver hull still caught the light in a way that made it seem almost alive. The design was beautiful: smooth curves that flowed like water, angles that suggested speed even when standing still. But anyone who knew anything about the station also knew the truth. That beautiful ship was the biggest joke in the entire galaxy. Jake Mitchell walked off the transport shuttle with heavy boots and heavier thoughts. He patted his pocket where his credit chip sat. 200 credits. That was everything he had left in the universe. 3 months ago, he'd been running his own salvage operation. Nothing fancy, but it was his. Then everything went wrong. Debts piled up. Creditors came calling. They took his cargo hauler, his equipment, everything. Now he was here at the edge of nowhere, hoping to find something, anything, that could fly. He didn't need much. Just a ship that could get from point A to point B without exploding. Even a rust bucket would do. He just needed to get back out there, start over, rebuild what he'd lost. That's when he met Krell 9. The Zenthari dealer was thin even for his species. His 6 eyes sat in 2 rows across his narrow face, and they all focused on Jake the second he mentioned he was looking for a cheap ship. The alien moved fast, his 3-fingered hands gesturing wildly as he pulled Jake through the station corridors. "I have exactly what you need," Krell 9 said, his words coming through a translator box that crackled with static. "Perfect for someone in your situation." They stopped in front of the Void Whisper. Jake's breath caught in his throat. Up close, the ship was even more impressive. The hull plates fit together so perfectly you couldn't see the seams. The viewing ports were made from some kind of crystal that was clearer than anything Earth made. This wasn't a cheap ship. This was the kind of vessel that should cost millions. "How much?" Jake asked, already knowing he couldn't afford it. "Free," Krell 9 said quickly. "Take it. Right now. Just sign the papers and it's yours." Jake's eyes narrowed. Nothing in life was free, especially not ships that looked like this. He walked closer, and that's when he saw them, the warning stickers. They covered parts of the hull in at least 15 different alien languages. Jake could read a few of them. Defective systems. Dangerous to operate. Engine failure risk. Do not fly. "What's the catch?" Jake asked. Krell 9's eyes blinked one after another in a wave pattern. Jake had spent enough time around Zenthari to know that meant the alien was embarrassed about something. "The ship doesn't work," Krell 9 admitted. His voice got quieter. "My people built it 300 years ago. It was supposed to be our greatest exploration vessel. Quantum fold engine, top of the line, cutting edge, the best technology we had. But something went wrong. The engine won't sync up with the ship's systems. It barely moves. When it does move, it's slower than the oldest cargo freighter in the galaxy. So why not scrap it?" Jake asked. "We tried." Krell 9's voice rose with frustration. "Every species that's come through here has tried to fix it. The Corvin engineers spent 6 months on it. The Taurix mechanic said it was impossible. A Dralion tech team called it cursed and refused to even touch it. 12 different captains have owned this ship. 12 captains have given it back to me. It takes up valuable dock space, and I can't even sell it for parts because nobody wants Zenthari quantum technology. Too complicated, they all say." Jake walked around the Void Whisper slowly. His hand ran along the smooth hull. It felt cold under his palm, but solid. Behind him, he could hear other salvagers and merchants watching. Some were laughing. One of them, a 4-armed Besk trader, called out in rough standard language. "Hey human. Don't waste your time. That ship is cursed. 12 captains tried already. 12 captains failed. You'll be number 13. The others joined in with their own warnings and jokes. They were making bets now, Jake realized. Betting on how many days before he brought the ship back, how many hours before he gave up and walked away. Jake looked at the Void Whisper again. Then he looked at Krell 9. "I'll take it," he said. Krell 9 nearly collapsed with relief. "Really? Well, thank the Void. Here, just put your signature here." He shoved a digital pad into Jake's hands. "No refunds, no liability, no warranty of any kind. You take full responsibility for." "Yeah, I get it," Jake interrupted. He pressed his thumb to the pad, watching his name appear on the contract. Jake Mitchell, owner of the most worthless ship in the galaxy. As he climbed the boarding ramp for the first time, he heard the aliens behind him already collecting on their bets. They were giving him 3 days before he quit. Some said 2. One optimistic Zenthri said maybe a week if the human was really stubborn. Jake didn't care what they thought. He stepped into the airlock and the door sealed behind him. The inside of the ship was dark, but he could feel the space around him. Could sense the size of it. This was a real ship. A good ship. It just needed someone who wouldn't give up on it. And Jake Mitchell had nowhere else to go. 3 weeks had passed since Jake signed those papers and took ownership of the Void Whisper. 3 long, frustrating weeks of living inside a ship that looked perfect but refused to work. He'd been sleeping in the captain's quarters, eating cheap ration packs, and spending every waking hour trying to figure out what was wrong. But there was nothing wrong. That was the problem. Jake had downloaded every technical manual he could find on Zenthri ships. He'd run diagnostic tests on every single system. Life support, navigation, propulsion, communications. Everything checked out perfectly. The quantum fold engine was a work of art. When he looked at the schematics, even with his limited understanding of alien technology, he could see the genius in it. Every component was exactly where it should be. Every connection was clean. Every power flow was optimal. And yet the ship wouldn't fly. Not really. He could get it to move, sure, but it was like pushing a boulder uphill. The engine would engage, then disengage. The navigation system would lock onto coordinates, then lose them for no reason. The whole ship felt like it was fighting against itself. Jake sat slumped in the captain's chair, staring at the engine readouts on the main display. The numbers and graphs showed perfect function. Everything was green. Everything was optimal. But it was all a lie because the ship barely moved faster than a shuttle pod. He was exhausted. His eyes burned from staring at screens. His back ached from crawling through access tunnels. His hands were covered in small cuts from working with unfamiliar tools. And he was no closer to an answer than when he started. Maybe the other captains had been smarter than him. Maybe they'd realized faster that this ship was hopeless. Maybe Jake was just too stubborn to accept defeat. In a moment of complete frustration, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his old music player. It was a beaten-up thing, ancient by Earth standards and practically prehistoric by galactic standards. But it still worked, and right now Jake needed something familiar. Something from home. He hit the shuffle button and leaned back in the chair, closing his eyes. The sound of a trumpet filled the cabin. Miles Davis. So what? One of Jake's favorite recordings. The music was smooth and unpredictable at the same time, the trumpet improvising its way through the melody, never playing it the same way twice. Jake let out a long breath and felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. At least he still had this. At least he still had. His eyes snapped open. On the display in front of him, the quantum particle monitor was doing something strange. The particles, the tiny building blocks that made the quantum fold engine work, were moving. Not in their usual slow random drift. They were flickering in patterns. Dancing almost. Moving in rhythm with the music. Jake sat up straight, his exhaustion forgotten. He watched the display carefully. The particles weren't moving in exact time with the trumpet. It was more subtle than that. They seemed to be responding to the improvisation, the unexpected turns in the melody. When the music flowed, they flowed. When it paused, they hesitated. He reached out and stopped the music. Immediately, the particles returned to their normal state. Slow. Sluggish. Barely moving at all. Jake's heart was pounding. He hit play again. The particles came alive. No way, he whispered to himself. No way. For the next 3 days, Jake barely left the captain's chair. He forgot to eat. He forgot to sleep. He was too focused on what he'd discovered. He played every type of music he had. Classical symphonies made the particles organize into rigid patterns, neat rows that barely moved. Electronic dance music made them pulse in steady, predictable beats. But jazz made them flow like water. Blues music did the same thing. Anything with improvisation, anything that was unpredictable and creative, made the particles dance. Jake pulled up the Zenthri operating manuals again, but this time he was looking for something specific. He read through the engine protocols, the command structures, the operational procedures. And suddenly it all made sense. The Zenthri had approached this engine like engineers. Like scientists. Every command had to be precise. Every input had to be calculated to the 10th decimal point. Every operation followed strict mathematical rules. They were trying to control the quantum fold engine the way you'd control any other machine, with precision and predictability. But that was the problem. Quantum particles don't work that way. Jake had learned about quantum mechanics back in school. He'd never been great at the math, but he understood the basic principle. Quantum particles exist in probability states. They don't follow exact paths. They exist in uncertainty until they're observed. They need room to move, to choose, to exist in multiple states at once. The Zen3 were trying to force certainty onto something that lived in uncertainty. They were trying to control something that needed freedom. Jake started pulling apart the navigation algorithms. He began rewriting code, introducing random elements into the calculations. He created spaces where the system could make choices instead of following rigid commands. He even dug out his old Earth-made navigation computer from his personal gear. It was outdated technology, the kind of thing that would make any alien technician laugh. Earth computers were slow and clunky compared to galactic standards. But that's exactly what Jake needed. He jury-rigged the Earth computer into the Zen3 systems, connecting tech that should never work together. The Earth computer was imprecise. It had random variations in its processing. It was, by galactic standards, flawed. It was perfect. Jake worked for hours, connecting systems that had no business being connected. He bypassed safety protocols. He ignored warning messages. He wasn't trying to make the ship work the right way. He was trying to make it work the wrong way. Finally, with his hands shaking from exhaustion and too much coffee, Jake initialized the hybrid system he'd created. He held his breath and engaged the quantum fold engine. The void whisper hummed. Not the stuttering, uncertain sound it had made before. This was different. This was a deep, resonant vibration that Jake could feel in his bones. The lights on the control panels brightened. The displays came fully alive. The entire ship seemed to wake up, like it had been sleeping for 300 years and was finally opening its eyes. Jake felt tears on his cheeks. He was laughing and crying at the same time. The ship was alive. Finally, after all this time, the Void Whisper was truly alive. News traveled fast on Kelver Station. Within hours of Jake getting the Void Whisper's engines running properly, everyone knew about it. The human had actually done it. He'd gotten the cursed ship to work. Nobody could quite believe it, but the power readings from his docking bay didn't lie. That dead ship was suddenly very much alive. Jake announced he was going to do a test flight. That's when things got interesting. Within an hour, every single observation deck on the station was packed. Aliens from dozens of different species crowded against the viewing windows. Some brought recording equipment. Others placed bets. Most just wanted to watch what they assumed would be an entertaining disaster. After all, getting the engines running was one thing. Actually flying the ship? That was something else entirely. Jake sat in the captain's chair, his hands resting on the controls. But they didn't feel like controls anymore. Over the past few days of working with the hybrid system, something strange had happened. The ship had started to feel like an extension of his own body. When he thought about turning, his hands moved before he consciously decided to move them. When he wanted more speed, the throttle responded to his intention before he touched it. It was like the ship was reading his mind, or maybe he was reading the ship's mind. He wasn't sure which. He took a deep breath and opened the comm channel. Kelver Control, this is the Void Whisper requesting departure clearance, he said, keeping his voice steady and professional. There was a long pause. Jake could almost hear the surprise in the silence. Finally, a controller's voice came through, speaking in the standard language used across the galaxy. This is Kelver Control. We have you on screen, Void Whisper. Another pause. Clearance is granted for test flight. Good luck, human. Emergency retrieval teams are standing by and ready to deploy. Jake couldn't help but grin. They were expecting him to fail. They were expecting him to crash or the engines to die or something to go horribly wrong. They had rescue ships ready to go fish him out of space. Appreciated, Control, Jake replied. But I won't need them. He disengaged the docking clamps and felt them release with a soft thunk. Using the maneuvering thrusters, he eased the Void Whisper out of its dock. The ship moved smoothly, responding to the lightest touch. Through the viewports, he could see the station sliding past, its massive structure glowing with thousands of lights. The moment they cleared the station's artificial gravity field and entered open space, Jake pushed the throttle forward. The Void Whisper didn't just speed up. It flowed. The quantum fold engine engaged and space itself seemed to bend around them. Jake had flown dozens of different ships in his career, but he'd never felt anything like this. The ship wasn't pushing through space, it was finding paths through reality that shouldn't exist, sliding through gaps in the fabric of the universe itself. Ahead of them, about 20,000 kilometers out, was the Razor Rocks. It was an asteroid field that most pilots gave a wide berth. The asteroids were densely packed and moved in unpredictable patterns, pulled by the conflicting gravity of 3 nearby moons. It was dangerous. Smart pilots went around it. Careful pilots avoided it entirely. Jake aimed straight for it. On the open comm channels, the ones that anyone could listen to, voices erupted. "Is he insane?" someone shouted. "He's heading for the Razor Rocks," another voice called out, disbelief clear in their tone. "The human's lost his mind. That ship's going to get torn apart." Back on the station, on every observation deck, beings leaned closer to the windows. This was going to be spectacular, they thought. Tragic, but spectacular. Jake heard all of it, but he wasn't paying attention to their words. He was listening to something else. The ship was talking to him. Not in words, but in feelings, in subtle vibrations through the control systems, in the way the displays flickered. It was telling him where to go. Showing him paths that his eyes couldn't see but his instincts could feel. They entered the Razor Rocks at a speed that should have been suicide. Asteroids the size of buildings spun past them. Some came within meters of the hull. But the Void Whisper moved like water finding its way through cracks in stone. Jake's hands moved on the controls, but he wasn't thinking about what he was doing. He wasn't calculating angles or trajectories. He was just feeling, sensing, knowing. The ship banked hard left, then dove down, though down didn't really mean anything in space, then spiraled through a gap between 3 tumbling asteroids that were about to collide. Jake could feel his heart pounding, could feel the adrenaline singing in his blood, but he wasn't afraid. He was exhilarated. The Void Whisper danced through the asteroid field like it had been choreographed. Banking, diving, spinning, flowing. Finding spaces that appeared just as they needed them. Moving in ways that shouldn't be possible according to the laws of physics as everyone understood them. 17 seconds after they entered the Razor Rocks, they emerged on the other side. Completely untouched. Not even a scratch on the hull. The comm channels exploded with noise. "Impossible," one voice shouted. "Did you see that? Did everyone see that? Check the readings, those maneuvers shouldn't be possible. The quantum signature is completely wrong, it's not following any known propulsion model." How is he doing that? Jake brought the Void Whisper back to the station in a wide, graceful arc. His hands were shaking now that the flight was over, but he was smiling so hard his face hurt. That had been the most incredible experience of his life. When he docked and walked down the boarding ramp, he found a crowd waiting for him. There must have been 200 beings gathered at the dock entrance. Some were cheering. Some were arguing about what they'd just seen. Recording drones buzzed overhead, capturing everything. At the front of the crowd stood a tall Zenthari woman in a dark military uniform. Her faceplates, the rigid structures that formed Zenthari facial features, were arranged in an expression that Jake had learned meant extreme surprise. "Human," she said, her voice cutting through the noise of the crowd. Everyone fell silent. "I am Admiral Thexal of the Zenthari Deep Space Fleet." Jake stopped at the bottom of the ramp and nodded respectfully. "Admiral, I will give you 500,000 credits for that ship," she said without preamble. "Right now. I can transfer the funds immediately." Jake shook his head. "Sorry, Admiral. She's not for sale." The Admiral's face plates shifted slightly. 1 million credits. "No. Name your price then. Whatever you want." Jake looked back at the Void Whisper. He could still feel the connection to the ship, like a faint humming in the back of his mind. "Admiral, with all due respect, you couldn't afford her. Not because of the credits, but because your people can't fly her. Only humans can." The crowd murmured and whispered. The Admiral's face plates rippled in a way that might have been offense or might have been curiosity. "Explain yourself, human," she said. Jake smiled. "Your people think in straight lines. Everything calculated, everything precise. Humans? We think crooked. We improvise. We feel our way through things. This ship doesn't need a pilot who follows the rules. She needs someone who knows when to break them." Over the next month, Jake pushed the Void Whisper to its limits. Every day brought new discoveries. The ship could do things that made experienced pilots shake their heads in disbelief. It could fold space in ways that cut travel time by 70%. It could sense gravitational anomalies before any scanner picked them up. It could navigate through nebula clouds that blinded every other ship's sensors. Each flight was like peeling back another layer of what was possible. But Jake wasn't satisfied with just flying. He wanted to understand. Why had the Zenthari given up on such an amazing ship? Why had they called it a failure when it was clearly a masterpiece? So at night, after long days of testing flights, Jake would sit in the captain's chair and dig through the ship's data archives. The Zenthari kept extensive records. There were maintenance logs going back 300 years. There were repair attempts documented in painful detail. There were notes from every captain who'd tried and failed to make the ship work. But Jake wanted to go deeper. He wanted to find the original design files. The problem was they were encrypted, locked behind security protocols that had been outdated for 2 centuries but were still effective. Jake wasn't a hacker by trade, but he was stubborn. He spent hours working through the encryption, trying different approaches, failing and trying again. Late one night, after his 5th cup of terrible station coffee, something clicked. The encryption broke open like a door finally giving way. Jake found himself staring at files he probably wasn't supposed to see. Design logs, personal notes, records from the original engineer who'd built the Void Whisper. Her name was Solarim. Jake started reading and couldn't stop. The logs told a story that made his chest tighten with anger and sadness. Solarim had been a visionary. She'd looked at ship design in a completely different way than anyone else in Zenthri history. Most ships were built to serve their pilots, to obey commands, to follow orders exactly as given. But Solarim had a different idea. She wanted to build a ship that was a partner. Not a tool but a companion. Something that would work with its pilot, not for them. She designed the Void Whisper to respond to creativity and intuition instead of rigid commands. She built it to flow and adapt rather than follow predetermined paths. It was revolutionary. It was brilliant. And the Zenthri High Command hated it. Jake read through meeting records and official reports. The High Command saw Solarim's design as dangerous. The Zenthri civilization was built on order and hierarchy. Everything had its place. Everything followed the rules. A ship that required unpredictability? That worked better when you broke the rules rather than followed them? It went against everything they believed in. They didn't just reject her design. They buried it. They declared the Void Whisper a failure. They destroyed Solarim's reputation. They made sure no one would take her ideas seriously ever again. Jake found the final entry in her personal log. It was dated the day before the Void Whisper was officially declared defective and removed from service. His hands trembled as he read her words. "They cannot accept what I have created," Solarim had written. "They call it broken because it will not bow to their control. They say it is flawed because it does not follow their commands exactly. But I know the truth. This ship is not broken. It is simply waiting." Jake leaned forward, reading faster. "It is waiting for a species that does not fear chaos. For beings that see beauty in uncertainty. For minds that understand the universe is not a formula to be solved but a dance to be experienced. I do not know if such a species exists. But if they do, they will find the Whisper. And when they do, when they finally understand what she can be, the stars themselves will sing." Jake had to stop reading for a moment. He wiped his eyes and let out a long breath. Solarim had built this ship for someone like him. For humans. She just hadn't known it yet. But there was more in the files. Jake kept digging and found something that made his heart race. Technical schematics. Design blueprints. Plans for not just one ship, but 17. The Void Whisper wasn't alone. Solarim had built 17 prototype vessels before the High Command shut her down. Each one was unique. Each one had different capabilities. One was designed for deep space exploration in areas no scanner could map. Another could phase through certain types of matter. A third could detect and navigate temporal anomalies. The designs were incredible, each one pushing the boundaries of what was possible. But they all shared one thing in common. They all required the same kind of partnership. The same creative, intuitive approach. The same willingness to break the rules and think in unconventional ways. And the Zenthri had scattered all 17 ships across the galaxy. They'd sold them as scrap. Given them away. Hidden them in junkyards and scrapyards on distant stations. They'd wanted to erase Solarim's legacy completely. Jake sat back in the captain's chair, his mind racing. 17 ships. 17 incredible vessels that everyone thought were worthless. 17 opportunities waiting for the right people to find them. He thought about the humans he knew. The salvagers and pilots who were always looking for opportunities. The dreamers who saw potential where others saw junk. The stubborn ones who never gave up on something just because everyone said it was impossible. Jake opened a secure communication channel back to Earth. It would take time for the message to arrive, bouncing through relay stations across space. But it would get there. He composed his message carefully, keeping it short but intriguing. Found something big. Really big. If you're looking for a ship and you're not afraid of a challenge, come to Kelver Station. Bring an open mind and a sense of adventure. Trust me on this one. He attached the coordinates and sent the message out to every human salvager, pilot and adventurer he'd ever worked with. Then he sent it to a few more he'd only heard about. Word would spread. Humans were good at that. Jake looked at the star map showing the locations of the other 16 ships. They were scattered across dozens of systems. Some were close. Others were halfway across known space. If the galaxy had been impressed by one human flying one supposedly broken ship, they hadn't seen anything yet. Wait until there was a whole fleet of them. Jake smiled and started plotting courses to the nearest locations. It was time to wake up the rest of Solarim's children. Time to show the galaxy what humans could really do. 6 months had passed since Jake first got the Void Whisper running. 6 incredible months that had changed everything. The galaxy had a new story to tell, a new legend that was spreading from station to station, from world to world. It was the story of the human who flew the ship that couldn't be flown. But more than that, it was the story of what came after. Jake hadn't kept his discovery to himself. Those messages he'd sent out to every human salvager and pilot he knew? They'd worked. People had come to Kelver Station. People who were broke like he'd been. People who were desperate for a chance. People who were willing to take a risk on something everyone else said was worthless. And they'd found the other ships. 12 of Solarim's 17 prototype vessels had been recovered. Each one had been claimed by a human who looked at a piece of supposed junk and saw possibility. Beth Carson had found the Star Dancer in a scrapyard on the edge of Corvin space. It was a ship that could navigate through dark matter storms, regions of space that were completely invisible to normal sensors and deadly to any vessel that tried to cross them. But Beth had figured it out. She'd learned to feel her way through the darkness, trusting the ship to guide her. Ryan Cooper was flying the Dreamwalker now. That ship had been rusting in an abandoned orbital dock for 150 years. Nobody wanted it because it kept disappearing. Literally. It would phase out of normal space for no apparent reason. But Ryan had discovered the truth. The ship could slip between dimensions. It could move through spaces that technically didn't exist. He'd learned to ride those dimensional currents like a surfer riding waves. Kate Sullivan commanded the Horizon's Edge, a vessel that had been declared too sensitive by the Tauric Science Guild. Its scanning systems would overload and shut down whenever they tried to use it. But Kate had realized the ship wasn't broken. It was just seeing too much. The scanners could read an entire star system in seconds, gathering data that would take other ships weeks to collect. She'd learned to filter the information, to work with the overwhelming flood of data instead of fighting against it. And there were 9 others. 9 more humans flying 9 more impossible ships. Together, they'd done things that made the galactic community sit up and pay attention. They'd mapped star systems that had confused alien cartographers for thousands of years. They'd outrun pirate fleets that were supposed to be untouchable. They'd rescued ships that were stranded in situations where rescue should have been impossible. And they'd done it all by breaking the rules, by trusting their instincts, by flying crooked instead of straight. Jake stood on Kelver Station's observation deck, looking out at his fleet. 12 ships floated in formation outside the station, their hulls gleaming in the light of the nearby star. They were getting ready to leave to go search for the last 5 ships. 5 more chances to prove that humanity's greatest strength was seeing value in what others threw away. He heard footsteps behind him. Measured, precise steps that could only belong to one person. Captain Mitchell, Admiral Thexel said. Jake turned around and was surprised to see she wasn't alone. Behind her stood about a dozen young Zenthari, all wearing pilot uniforms. They were watching him with expressions he'd learned to read, curiosity mixed with something like hope. Admiral, Jake said with a nod. Come to make another offer for my ship? She shook her head, her face plates shifting into an arrangement he'd learned meant humility. For a proud species like the Zenthari, that was significant. No. I come to ask for something more valuable than any purchase. Will you teach us? Teach my pilots to fly the way humans do? To think beyond our protocols and calculations? To feel instead of just compute? Jake studied her carefully. That's asking a lot, Admiral. Your entire culture is built on precision and order. Yes, she said quietly. And that rigidity nearly caused us to lose something beautiful forever. She gestured toward the Void Whisper dock nearby. Solarim was my grandmother, Captain Mitchell. She died in disgrace. The High Command stripped her name from all official records. They erased her from our history. But she was right about everything. We have been so rigid for so long that we forgot how to adapt. We forgot how to dance with the universe instead of trying to control it. Jake felt his throat tighten. Solarim was her grandmother. The woman who'd built these ships had been family to this admiral standing before him. I'll teach your pilots, Jake said. But I have one condition. Solarim's name gets restored. Full honors. full recognition of her genius. She deserves to be remembered as the visionary she was. Admiral Thexal's face plates shifted into what might have been a smile. Already done, Captain. We began the restoration 3 months ago. There is now a memorial station named after her near our homeworld. Her designs are being studied in every academy. Her final message, the one you found in the Void Whisper's logs, has been broadcast across all Zenthri space. She is finally getting the honor she deserved. Jake smiled. Then let's teach your people how to fly crooked. Hours later, Jake sat in the captain's chair of the Void Whisper, preparing to depart. The quantum fold engine hummed beneath him, those tiny particles dancing their endless dance. He placed his hands on the controls and felt the ship respond. Not to commands but to connection. To partnership. All right, Whisper, he said softly. Let's go find your sisters. Time to show the galaxy what broken really looks like when someone's brave enough to fix it the wrong way. The engine engaged. Space folded around them. And just for a moment, Jake could have sworn he heard something beautiful, like the stars themselves were singing. Behind him, 11 other impossible ships followed. Ahead of him, 5 more waited to be discovered. And throughout the galaxy, beings looked up at the stars and talked about the humans, the species that could turn garbage into gold and transform broken into legendary. The journey was far from over. But Jake smiled as the Void Whisper carried him toward the unknown. Because he'd learned something important. Sometimes the best things in life are the ones everyone else gave up on. Sometimes the greatest treasures are the ones everyone calls worthless. You just have to be brave enough to see what others couldn't.